I'm revisiting a fugue of Bach's BWV 847, and I'd like to go over the structure of this particular fugue. Now, there's a musicologist or a theoretician named Jose Rodriguez Elvira. If you look on the internet, you look up his name in conjunction with this fugue, he marks out the subject, which is nice. He marks out the counter subject. He writes tonal answer. These are the vocabulary of a lot of fugues using these terms, but I'm going to bring it down to earth on this particular fugue. So here's the subject of the fugue. It occurs in one voice, which is the alto voice. I'm going to play it slowly, and you can hear how it's composed. What's the rhythm of it? What's the melodic contour? And what key is it in? It's in C minor. And it goes like this. Rest. Bum, bum, short, short, long. Short, short, da-da-dee, da-da-da. That's your subject. Okay, now above that, what comes next is what's called the tonal answer. I'm just sort of stripping this away in little parts. The tonal answer is 5 notes above where you played the subject. So you're going to be on a G, because maybe you started on a C. And here it's a F sharp, so it's actually going to go into G minor. But the point is it's going up 5 notes, and here's what it sounds like. It's very similar, but not exactly what you heard in the subject. It has some little melodic departures, but enough of it is a connection, enough of a connection to the subject. And here it is. Short, 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 and I'm not going to show you the slight difference, because when you had the initial subject, you went down a fourth and you went up a half step. Here you go down a fifth and up a third. But it still so resembles what you heard before that you can't quibble about it. It is enough of a resemblance to the subject. So it's called the tonal answer. Now, under that tonal answer, while you play that, is the counter subject. The counter subject is known for, in this particular fugue, descending scale in 16th notes, one part of it, and the next part of the counter subject is 8th notes. And let's see what it sounds like. Now, it's coming down with raised 6th and 7th notes of C minor. Normally, we associate that with melodic minor going up, and we usually come down in the natural minor and nullify the raised notes. But here he raises them. It's kind of more interesting to hear those raised notes coming down. So here's your counter subject. And it continues in 8th notes. Now the other thing you want to do when you're learning it is how are you marking off slurs, what articulations you're using. And he suggests exactly what I did, which is a legato coming down with the descending 16ths. And he slurs 4 notes. He lifts, he slurs, I do the next 4 notes, and then I lift. So 4 plus 4 plus 4. So 4/8 plus another 4/8 plus another 4/8. That's how I do it. So all of that was the counter subject, quite a lot. It fits into almost 3 minutes, 2 measures plus a little resolution over the second measure into the third measure. So if you put the tonal answer on top, combine it with the counter subject, you want to be hearing the equality of those 2 voices. It's very important when you're playing Bach that you don't say, I want to just hear that because it sounds like the subject. I'll just tack on the left hand. You want to be really aware of the individualization of those 2 independent voices. Like an invention you want to hear. 2-part invention, equality of voices. So here's what's happening when you come down. You start the counter subject against the tonal answer. Now, sometimes what I do to make sure that I am not tacking on a left hand to my right hand is I do a little exercise. I decide to play the right hand really lightly and make sure I'm following the left hand, just in a sense of, a practice routine. So I might do this. That ensures that when I more likely equalize it, that I will be aware of both voices. Now I'm going to equalize it. Okay, so now we've only have two voices. We haven't had the third voice yet. But before we get the third voice, Elvira calls this next two measures a transition, which prepares us for the third voice. So what it is it does not have the full subject. It might have elements of the subject, which it does. He takes pieces of the subject in this transition and does sequences of it, such as this. Da, da, da. We recognize that piece of the subject. Da, da, da. Boom, boom, da, da, da. That's the transition. The left hand, meanwhile, is doing the inversion of the counter subject pieces of it. Because remember, the counter subject in full, at least the 16th part, was. So now what he's doing is he's inverting it underneath what I just played as this transition with the sequences of pieces of the subject. We have pieces of the counter subject, but going up instead of falling down, and it's only partial. Right? So we just took part of it. We didn't have 4 plus 4 coming down. We didn't have all of this. We decided to go up and a piece of it and stop on this tied note. Da, 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 tied note. Da, 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 da. Against that is, as I said, the pileup of these sequences of pieces of the subject, 16ths to 2/16ths to the 8th that you heard in the original subject. So together you get this. Done. Now what's interesting is a crescendo there. So, artistic, here again is another dimension of learning it. You might as well do what you're going to do later on just to get a sense of how you're going to contour the fugue itself. So since these are piling up higher and higher, you would start softer on this. Under voice. Remember, this is an under voice. Under voice. So that's the transition. Now, right now at this point, measure 7, the left hand is stating the subject in the bass in full. And it's exactly the same as when it started an octave higher. So now it's an octave lower in the bass line. And it'll be exactly as you heard it, I believe, at the beginning. Let's see. Short, short, long. There it is. Okay, now what's happening in the right hand is, as you know, the transition finished here. What we have here is we're coming down with a counter subject. Remember, it doesn't have to be the same notes, but it has to be enough of a connection to the strand rhythmically and melodically. So what it's doing is coming down in 16ths. So remember, the counter subject initially in its purest form was, remember, it doesn't have to be exactly that. That's why there's no real superstructure that is intact in this. It's just ideas that make connections. And here's the connection up. Now, suddenly we have two voices up here, which is the eighth note part of the counter subject. Remember, it was on the first page. That was the second part of the counter subject. There's a lot to think about here. So on top, we have, sounds familiar. And I'm looking at the fingering. See, these fingerings are adjusted because of what's going to be under there. I mean, I would love to have consecutive fingers there, but I can't because of what's going to be under that. That's why you heard 5-5-5, 5-5-4-5, where I would love to just have consecutive fingers, but what's under it is a little piece of the counter subject, just a little motif. And this is what's under that. Thumb, 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 bum, 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 bum. See, we got thumbs there because of what's upstairs. Okay, so now if we put together that second part of the counter subject, we get. This gets a little tricky with the fingering, so you have to work out your fingerings really carefully, which you can do very slowly. Parallel thirds. The upper voice has the whole eighth part of the counter subject. For one, there. Good to do that first. That's what I would do. When I first learned it, I did it. Just crept through it, just like that. So really sure of my fingering, knowing what the top voice, which is an exact pull out of the second part of the counter subject, the eighth note part, and knowing that the under voice was just a little tiny piece of it, of the counter subject eighth note part. And that's where the third voice was. So under that, as you know, is the bass, which is the subject, complete in the same key as the beginning, the same notes. So this can get pretty complicated. So slowly. I would practice that over and over, and I might do a permutation of my practicing where I play the subject softer. This is just for practice. Flesh out that top voice of the counter subject, the eighth note component. So I make sure I hear that. I don't just tack it on to the subject. So right now I'm just showing you this gets a little complex. Now we have three voices. This is the first time we've heard three voices. Okay, so that is the complete subject in the bass. And I believe once you get everything in every voice, I believe it's called the exposition. It's called the exposition when you have three voices finally, I believe. Okay, now the next part, you got to really wade through this, and it's good for your brain. We just ended here. Now, what happens here is this is going to be an episode. An episode is where you have no subject. And again, it's like a transition. It has no subject, but it has pieces of the counter subject, pieces of the subject, until the next statement of a complete subject. Okay, so we just came out of this part. Let's see. And this is going to be without the subject. The right hand will be pieces of the subject. Da da dum bum bum ba da dum bum. Now we're back. That's where we come back to the subject. So right before that was what was called the episode. On the left hand, we have what resembles the counter subject meandering around, but it's not true to the actual counter subject, but it has the connection, which is Now what characterizes this is different keys of each of these scales. C minor first. This is C minor, but it's going to change. Seems like F minor for a moment. But then it's going to quickly go into E flat minor, dominant of E flat minor. Just showing you. Now it's going to go into A flat major. Let's see, we had C minor, then we went into F minor briefly, we went into E flat major, and then A flat major. So that's going to be important that you feel those keys under your fingers when you do this episode. Now if you go, and this helps because you really got to feel these scales where you're going. This is a big jump. That's hard, those jumps. Lateral, you just do lateral, stay close, stay close. Okay, so I'm going a little quicker. Okay, so this is an episode again, and I'm going to go slowly when I do it together. This section is, we finished. New idea. Not new idea, new key. Okay, there's the episode. It's over because now we have the subject in E flat major. Short, short. Okay, in the left hand we have a piece of the counter subject. Now you got to know all these parts. And I would suggest that you even peel away. When you heard the parallel thirds there, I would do the upper voice would be the tenor and then the bass, and just see what each voice is sounding like. Okay, so now we're at measure 11, where we have a complete subject coming now with those scales. And here's the subject. So that was all E flat major. Okay, now we have another episode coming. And this is known for its ascending, interesting. It looks like now the counter subject with all the 16ths. Remember, this is not, it's an episode, so you will not hear the subject, but you'll hear components of the subject and counter subject. Looks like upstairs now is a set of 16th notes that is in the opposite direction of the original counter subject. But now it's up in the soprano, so you have this. Okay, so that's barred from, but in reverse direction, in long streams of that. Meanwhile, on the left hand, you also have pieces of the second part of the counter subject, which is the eighth notes, like a little duet. So it reminds us of the original counter subject, the eighth note part, which was. Now, you can say to me, it doesn't really sound like that, but there are pieces of that are right in there. Right here. Except that it doesn't go straight down, goes back up. So what? You have to be creative when you're a composer. It's going back up. Up. You can see this is really good for your brain, as I say. An aging brain can really use an infusion of a fugue. Okay, so this second episode, we're going to, again, we hear three voices now. I should go slow. That was B flat major. Now let's see what happens here in terms of the key. That was F minor, but C minor. So you have components of F minor going through there, which was the melodic. But now, C minor melodic. All right. Now that was an episode because we didn't have the subject there at all, but complete subject. Now we have, this is going to be a very long video. Now we have the complete subject in the left hand here. Now it's in a different key. And it goes into the alto voice. It splits. This is where with Bach you have to know that you're splitting hands sometimes. So we definitely have that. I believe that was G minor. Am I right? Yep, that was G minor. Okay, so the subject is in G minor. Resembles the tonal answer when we did this. Right? We came in with, it's a little different contouring of the melody, but enough to connect. Okay, but this time it's a real connection to the subject. It's the same intervals. Okay, now on top of that, you're going to have the counter subject coming down just like you had on the first page. So now you have this slightly different. Here's the second part. Right? Because remember, the first page you had the 16th portion and then you had the 8th portion. It's right there. Meanwhile, underneath, the whole subject. Now you also have another voice down here. A piece of the 8th note part of the counter subject. And again, it can't be one of these genotypes where everything fits a certain mold. It just doesn't. Don't be fooled by that when people tell you that there's an exact structure to the fugue. Each one is a little different. Put this together, measure 15. We have the subject down below, and then it's going to cross over. Let's see what happens here. Bring out the inner voice now. See, it's in here now. That's That's tricky, isn't it? Because it's inside now. It's not on the top. It's divided by the hands from the left hand into what would be the alto. Dividing between the tenor and the alto together combined gives you the subject. Okay, now we have another episode. This thing is going to go on forever. The next episode is measure 17, where the subject drops out, and you have this component of this would be pieces of the subject. Dee-da-dum, bum, bum, dee-da-dum. That's a piece of the beginning of the subject. Dee-da-dum. Okay. Now, under that, you have the ascending counter subject. Again, this is not anything complete because we're in an episode, so we're not hearing complete subject. We're hearing ascending counter subject, 16th portion, in G minor. Not for long. And then da-da-bum, bum, bum, dee-da-bum, bum, bum, da-da-bum. I think this is all... lost my place. No, here I am. Bum, bum, dee-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, I think the subject is coming back right about there. You can see how complicated this can be. So, in the left hand episode, dee-da-bum, bum, bum, da-da-bum. You know where that comes from. Dee-da-bum, bum, bum, comes from that little piece of that, but it doesn't have to be in the same notes. It can be different keys. Da-da-bum, bum, bum. On top of it, gotta get good fingering. Okay, that's basically what you're doing. So if you do it slowly, you're getting... All episode. You could see, you could hear when you have those ascending 16ths that you are doing the inverted direction of the counter subject because it's going up in 16ths, not like its original form. And it keeps changing keys, by the way. Now he's reversing it left hand. That's when the subject's coming back. Subject's coming back in the original notes that you heard it. It's up in the soprano. Da-da-dum, bum, bum, da-da, short, short, long, da-da, short, short, da-da-dee, da-da. Okay, that's the complete statement of the subject. The left hand is going to be coming down with the 16th, just like the original counter subject. It's not inverted. Okay, so let's see if we can go into that. I'm going to go a little bit back here. Okay, now is another episode. And the episode will not have the complete subject. It will have pieces of it, and you can hear the piece of it. Should play the whole thing now because you already know all the different components and you can hear as I play them what's happening. So let's see, we have this. Going slow. Episode. Now we have the subject coming in the bass at this juncture. Ta-da, short, short, long, ta-da, short, short. You have to know when you have an episode and when you have a subject coming back. So let's see if we could lead from the transition of the episode. It's in the key of C minor. little ending here. Finally, one more time on the subject. Short, short, long, short, short. I don't know how long this took, but once you know the basic components of what the subject, counter subject, tonal answer pieces of the subject, you then can launch into these more complicated areas and know from the beginning what you're extracting from the subject, what you're extracting partially from the counter subject. Are you going in different directions in each one, and what's happening?